Hello, everybody. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC. We have a bit of a lull after the big tournaments in Vikings and Gibraltar, but I'll have action from the Moscow Open and the St. Louis Norm Congress. But first up, a match between two legendary former world champions. Anatoly Karpov retired from classical tournaments years ago, but he can still be coaxed into playing in rapid events. He took on Ho Yifan in a six-game match in China. At 66, Karpov is nearly 3 times older than his 23-year-old opponent. Ho Yifan also outrates the 2018 version of Karpov, and is certainly a lot more active. Still, given Karpov's tremendous reserve of knowledge and his predilection for rapid chess, I'm not totally surprised he was able to squeeze out a 3.5, 2.5 win. I may be more surprised that the match was so entertaining. In his dotage, Karpov seemed to play more for the fans than we were used to in his prime. So let's start by examining a typical matchup of Ho's determined attacking play and Karpov's notable defensive prowess. So here we go. This is game 2. Now, Karpov won the first game in a very technical style, and now he's defending the black pieces. Now, it's interesting that Ho Yifan plays d3, which is how people play nowadays because nobody wants anything to do with the martial attack. I don't know if Karpov has ever played the martial attack, and I don't think he's ever played the open variation either, but Ho Yifan nevertheless sticks to this move order. So the first wrinkle is the knight comes to a3, which doesn't actually yet attack the pawn. Now it does. And so Karpov just defends it because he's going into a briar formation. And so the knight heads into the middle to look for the f5 square, which is very typical. But in this case, the bishop, instead of coming to c2, stays on that diagonal pointing to f7. The downside for white is that because the knight on e3 is kind of in the way, this move d5 is a little bit easier to manage. There's no pressure on the e5 pawn. So Ho Yifan plays a very double-edged way. And she's looking to get a kingside attack going, but we know Karpov knows a little bit about how to deal with it. So he steps up with the king to chase away the queen, and then he blocks things up. So he's really kind of taken care of that mating attack. And now he decides to grab this pawn on a4, which he certainly can do, although it allows white to play c4 and get some play going. And black wants to be careful about letting things get out of hand on that long diagonal. So bishop f4 takes, and now Karpov really doesn't need to play bishop takes e3. It's not such a big deal to take this pawn on d5, and he can play any number of moves to activate the rook on a8 with a pretty good position. But he decides that he wants to kind of clarify things and taking on d5, and it's a little bit risky to allow this pawn to come up to f6 with a check. And he goes ahead and takes it now. Now, one possible variation is king h8, queen takes e4, walking into discovery, knight c3, queen e7, queen takes d4 check, bishop e3, queen e4, okay, threatening mate. So that gets the queen trade, queen takes e4, knight takes e4 with an unclear position. Black is pawn up, maybe not a meaningful pawn, and white has bishop pair. So Karpov grabs this pawn and risky move because the long diagonal, right? And Hou Yifan jumps on it right away, but this was perhaps a little inaccurate, and that maybe she should have started with bishop b4, because if the rook moves, that's going to, lead to some more complications on the f file, as that pawn on f7 is no longer defended. So black probably would not move the rook. It could afford to sack and exchange. He's got some pawns. So possible variations. Okay. One interesting possibility is knight d5, so then white's got to take, and queen takes e4. So if black doesn't do anything special, white has an advantage being up in exchange. So interesting move here is knight c3, queen e5 check f6. Now, if the queen just retreats, white has to watch out about something like queen e3, knight takes a2, rook takes a2, bishop g2, even stronger than queen d5, which white could play b3, and king takes bishop, queen d5 check. Black has a big advantage, but go back to this position after f6. Instead of moving the queen, white sacks the exchange here to take this knight, and comes out with a clearly better position as the connected passed pawns outvalue the doubled a pawns. So this is one possibility. Bishop b4, probably knight h5 is stronger, and then white could take the rook, but he doesn't necessarily need to take it right away. He could wait with, I should say she, get my pronouns right. She can wait with rook c1, and it's a very complicated position. It's hard enough to play in slow chess, but maybe fairly balanced. After d5, Karpov snaps that up too. So at the moment, he's actually 3 pawns up, and white takes. And I think it's too quick to give this check. Again, I think better to play bishop b4, and if the rook moves away, then give bishop c3 check, and black can't block on the f file. So black could certainly consider, again, sacrificing the exchange. Probably Hou Yifan figured that Karpov would just give the exchange and play with all the pawns, but then the position is fairly open that she could try to do something with her rooks. So she instead played bishop c3, and after f6, she quickly runs out of gas in this position. Probably she should start by taking the pawn on a4, getting rid of that, and the rook can come into the middle to d4, or maybe come in on the b file, try to get in there. Not a bad idea to grab that pawn, because she tried to get some kind of penetration, but it just didn't work. She was stymied there, and pretty soon she was being pushed back, and the game kind of abruptly ends. He starts maneuvering that bishop, and that's where the game ends. So I'm gonna figure that this was a time forfeit at this point, but black is in pretty good control of the position. He could play, for instance, h5 to start operations on the king side. The white rook can't come to the f file to attack the f6 pawn. So black playing with a few extra pawns and probably on the way to victory. So the defense rests in game one there. So after that, Ho probably had enough of Karpov's signature technique and defense, and she played very provocatively in game 3, eventually earning the point by counterattack. So we'll take a look at that one next. Okay, so Karpov plays d4. I once made a joke on a during commentary that for the younger players, they think of Karpov as a d4 player. When I was a kid, he played e4, so I thought of d4 as him in his Fat Elvis period. But anyway, sometimes d4 is maybe a little bit easier to digest. Hou Yifan plays an opening that they used to call the English defense, very popular when I was a teenager. And this line was hotly debated in the pages of Modern Chess Theory, which was a publication of the time. And I think the most common move was bishop d6, hoping to get in bishop b5, which white can prevent, and black would try to develop swiftly. Hou Yifan plays an unusual move, queen e7, obvious point to preventing e4, and perhaps with an idea to answer knight f3 with takes and knight e4, and maybe trying to kind of surround that d5 pawn and take it off. So we see Karpov plays bishop g5, h6, bishop h4, and now is where we leave the books. There's one other game from this position, which is kind of entertaining, so I'll show it quickly. Taylor against Akobian, a game played in Los Angeles in 2002, went like this. Takes, bishop g7, f3, maybe a little bit too ambitious, knight h5, d6, queen e3, and that's why I don't like f3 so much, d takes c7, and now instead of knight a6 with a fine position, Akobian got very ambitious and sacked a piece, and now the computer was saying that knight b5 is good for white, but rook c1 happened, bishop d4, knight h3, g4, and black is going to get some kind of check with the queen, and check, king d2, queen e3, and the game ended by perpetual like that. So very weird game. That's all we had to go on in this position. After d6, it's already a new position. Okay, it should be better for white, but of course a lot to happen here. And c5. Okay, and now, all right, Karpov kind of takes the bait. He jumps in there, knight b5, knight e5, bishop f6. I mean, this is actually a bit controversial to do. We see this type of position from Trumpovsky, but white will miss that dark squared bishop because he's got these pawns in the middle and light square. He's got a lot of open diagonals for the dark squared bishop. And then queen a4. Well, there's only one thing to do. You got to go king d8 to stop the threat of the knight check. So white peels back and leaves black with the king in the middle, but the position is sufficiently close that it's not so easy to take advantage of that. And both sides just develop their pieces for a long time. The king even maneuvers back the other way. I'm going to really kind of just go pretty quickly over all this maneuvering because it's not game of the week. Got a lot of other games to show. And so after a lot of maneuvering, this knight gets to f6. That could be a problem for white. So Karpov goes for this counterattack on the queen side, but it doesn't really get very far. And he leaves himself vulnerable on the king side. He offers his queen for two rooks. And Hou Yifan's, nah, I'm not going to take that. I want to keep my queen for attacking, but I will take this h5 pawn. So Karpov, sacking in exchange, try to get stuff going, but Hou Yifan lands a blow on the other side, bishop h4, and the queen comes over, and white does not have enough pieces to defend over there. And so he tries to run, but she pulls him back in. If king takes bishop, then queen h4 and take on h3. So she kind of keeps him a little bit confined. And now just plays a couple of quiet moves, gets the king in the corner so that the rooks can work together. Karpov trying for some kind of breakthrough, but his king just becomes very exposed. She just plays this very calmly. And after knight d4, hoping to get something by attacking the bishop, but it's not a big enough threat. D takes c5, undermines the rook. Can't take the queen, of course, because it's pinned. And rook takes b8 with check, and white's position falls apart. So Hou Yifan, down 2 games, managed to bring Karpov forward, maybe a little bit out of his comfort zone, and ended up winning the game. Now Karpov did salt away the match by winning game 5 before Hou Yifan got some consolation by winning the last game with in a long technical process. So the game decided by 1 point, and only one draw out of 6, which I would say is a good deal for the fans. So that was an interesting match there. All right, the 2018 Moscow Open may not bowl us over with 16 players over 2,500 and 3 over 2,600. One time that was amazing. Now we see open tournaments like that all the time. But it's still a very strong event, and it was not all that friendly to the ELO favorites. Probably in Russia, that's not that much of a surprise. Now, the victor was 12-seeded Semen Lomasov, likely unknown to our viewers. I admit I never heard of him before. He, as a 15-year-old IM, he's certainly an upstart, but he has a seasoned GM rating of 25-30. Not bad, right? In any case, he powered through the opposition to the tune of 8 out of 9. The key game was his defeat of the top-seeded Tamir Nabati of Israel. It was a topsy-turvy game that hinged on a major decision of where to run with the king. Let's take a look at that one next. Okay, I'm not going to focus too much in the early part of the game. I mean, it's another one of those bishop f4s, and it used to be you see bishop f4 from players that just didn't want any complications, but now you see it. You see it with players that say, "Okay, let's just not worry about theory, and let's just get to a position, have a fight later on." And there's something that makes sense. So Lomasov, okay. Black can get the same kind of position by taking on d4 and bringing the bishop out first, but he chases after the dark squared bishop. He doesn't get it, so he does end up performing a lot of unusual maneuvers, and then white tries to exploit by opening the center, but still a double-edged position. And the chances are fairly even for a long time. I'm not going to really try to make too much out of this mess, except to say that Nabati sacrifices a lot of pawns in this game. He looks for repetition, and Lomasov says no. F3. Okay, computer says queen d2 was better. He's just he's sacrificed his entire king side. Really interesting. King f2, and now, this is a mistake. Actually, it's quite a big mistake. And black should play bishop b7, mostly so that bishop isn't hanging in tactics, and also, if he could trade some pieces on the c file, he doesn't mind because he's ahead. So this actually could have led to disaster, because white again missed an opportunity to play queen d2 even more strongly here, because if the knight jumps into e4, white's just going to take that. The idea is that the white queen is coming to g5. There's no real good defense to that. Black could try to swing the queen over to g7 to defend the g6 pawn, but then the bishop on c6 hangs. So white has quite a big advantage after queen d2. But after rook h1, not so much, because now black is going to land this check on e4. All right, now we have the key position in the game. All right, the king has to move, 2 legal moves. King d3, king takes f3. And Nabati says, I'm going to avoid discover check. But the king actually isn't really safer there, and this f3 pawn, he regrets letting that pawn live. So he actually should have taken on f3. And now here the computers actually start to say that the position zeroes out with proper play. And I'm going to give a couple of these variations because they're entertaining. So let me show you, first of all, bishop d5, which is a correct move. I don't think it's the only move. And we see a line like this: rook takes c8, rook takes c8, queen h2. Of course, rook g5, knight g5 happens with check. I'm not gonna pretend that I found any of this myself. And it's okay. White could try to play on with king e1. Black could have also taken with the rook, which supposedly is also a draw, but I think that maybe this one seems safer on the surface. Takes, queen h3, and black has to take in view of white threatening to come in with the queen, and then some defensive move, and white has enough of a perpetual check, but not enough for more than that, as he's a couple pawns down with limited material. All right, so back to king f3. Well, what if black plays more obvious move, knight g3 check? Actually, that move is quite a bit of a mistake. Big problem being that white can take it. Okay? So rook takes c6, rook takes c6, rook g5 check. And now I think king f8 is strongly met by d5, blocking the diagonal, and then white starts attacking again. So relatively best line, although winning for white. And I'm not going to give too many branches, but let's just enjoy it. Queen check, and now rook c2 check, just like in the movies. Check, not checkmate, but check, check. So white has to play d5. Now the knight is hanging, but also rook is hanging. So this is given as relatively best. Takes, queen e1, and the problem for black is that white has a winning attack. Not going to get bogged down in the branches, but it's all forced. It's a forced win for white. Queen e4 check, king d6, queen f4 check, king c6, bishop e4, and then eventually white just takes the knight, and now he's going to land a decisive check with the rook, and for instance, king c6 check, check, and next move queen takes queen, and white wins a rook. Long variation, but suffice it to say, king takes f3, white should have played, and then black has to find some sensible move, and the game goes on. But king d3, this is a losing move. Bishop b5 check, bishop c4. But I think what Nabati missed is that now black takes the bishop with the rook. And this is very important because the bishop is actually covering the d7 square, which is quite key. So, for instance, if bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, and now rook takes c4, rook takes g5 check, leads to a forced mate. The coolest point is that if king f6, rook f5 check, and then the white queen comes in and ultimately gives checkmate on the d7 square. But after rook takes c4, rook takes, okay, so let's say white plays, white could play rook takes c4, but actually would probably lead to about the same thing. He takes on g5, and now king f6, and all right, what about rook f5 check now? Well, rook f5 check, black simply takes it, gets triple pawns, and now the queen is covering the d7 square, so white actually has no mate. Black is just winning. Right? So rook f5 check is not a quads move here. So he plays rook g6, but here the black king is able to run, and ultimately it gets away, so white has to answer to what's going on, and the knight has to kind of back off. And now with f2, followed by the queen coming into play, black's counterattack is decisive. Queen f5. Also knight g3 is winning because queen f2, queen f5 check, and wherever the king goes, knight e4 fork. But perhaps Lomonosov felt a little safer just setting up the discovered check. There's hardly anything that that white can do. And after queen g2, bishop c4. If he takes with the rook, then he can lose his queen after f1 or knight g3. So he takes with the pawn, but now it's a forced mate. Knight c5. If the king runs this way, queen d3, king takes, queen e3, and that's the kicker. That picks up the rook with check, and it's also still forced mate if black plays correctly, but he's also won a piece. Yeah, he's also come out a piece ahead. So back to this position. The game concluded, king c3, check, king b4, queen d2, knight d3 check leads to mate, but so does this one. It's a matter of taste. King a4, and queen takes a2, and that's the end. The only move is rook a3, and then queen c4 is mate. So very nice counterattack at the end by Lomonosov. Of course, there were mistakes in those crazy tactics. The computer is always going to find that. But that position after f4 check, the decision time, that was very, very fascinating. So that was a huge win for Lomonosov. And then he secured the title with a surprisingly easy win in the final round, as he demonstrated trading lots of pieces in a symmetrical pawn structure. Does not guarantee anything. And we'll see how he did that next. Okay, so, of course, Lomonosov was in a great position, coming with 7 out of 8, not under a lot of pressure to win this game, but I think on those circumstances, you're kind of happy when your opponent plays a Philidor, it gives you a nice space advantage, and you can kind of, play for a win if you want to. You can trade pieces, no problem. A6, I mean, usually black puts pawn on c6. So getting that pawn to a5 is generally very favorable for white. And Samosenko, who I have to admit, I don't know anything about him. He's 100 points lower rated than Lomonosov, so not a bad pairing to get in the last round. But the black player does not throw any punches in this game. He's just maneuvering around trading, and Lomonosov is fine with that. But he's not just trading to make a draw. It's far from it, because black has problems to solve in this position. He's got to get his pieces out. White controls the only open file, and he's got a nice structure. His pawn on a5 is very good for the pieces on the board, because it fixes these pawns on light squares. As long as bishop's on the board, very happy. But also b7 could be a target. All these pawns can be a target. In fact, if black just had that pawn on a5, had his pawn on a5, that might change things a lot. But even so, this rook a3 is really a nice maneuver, because that rook goes around attacking things. And maybe black should have taken a chance by playing bishop e6 at some point, even live with a rook coming to the 7th rank and try to get some counterplay. But he basically plays believing that he can be patient, and eventually he'll break out of it. And he seems to be doing all the right things, but he doesn't get anywhere. First of all, he has to weaken his position with c6. And then he gets attacked on the other side. g5. Now, this is the type of position where black could play bishop e6. It's, according to the computer, it's almost about as good as anything else. And he could just play the position a pawn down. I have the feeling that white probably would eventually win, because it looks like he's got a lot of favorable things going in addition to being a pawn up. But at least black would be able to move. What ends up happening is much worse. After g5, white just puts the rook back on the d file. And now black is just stuck. And the best thing to do, I would say, is literally nothing. It's just kind of wait, rook a8, something like that. Maybe h6. I'm not sure if that helps him. But Samosenko tried to forcibly get pieces out, try to get some counterplay. And it was just the wrong idea, because he weakened his position. And then he weakened further by taking. He should have at least tried to block with f4. Because now rook h6 and rook e1, the position starts to collapse. All right, king f8. Very sad. But if bishop f5, g4, takes, rook takes e4, and white gets this one, and this one, wins a pawn, and with much better pieces, just a disaster for black. So tried to bring the king over, but now he's not covering the middle of the board. And so white just takes his pawn, and black hopes that he can consolidate a bit. But this check really hurts him as it shoves him into the corner. Now he's back ranked. And now look how this game finishes. Bishop f7. Of course, black is totally helpless. But it gets worse than that. He's actually literally in zugzwang. The bishop on c8 has no moves. The pawns on the queen side, well, all he can do is give them away. His king can't move. His rook has no safe move. There's no move on the first rank, and rook takes bishop, rook d8 is mate. So really kind of amazing to reduce your opponent to such a complete zugzwang in 36 moves. So well done by Lomasov, but it has to be said that black did not really put up much opposition there. So nice win for Lomasov. I don't have any information as to whether he's got enough for Grandmaster title yet, but I'm sure that's a norm and a step in the right direction. Okay, now the St. Louis Chess Club has been a constant sponsor of norm-bearing round robins, and they have another batch in the works this week. There's two tournaments, a GM norm event and an IM norm event. The GM event includes some interesting players, like 17-year-old Greek sensation Stavrula Tsolakidou. Now, I have not coached at the World Youth for 5 years, so I missed Stavrula winning the girls under 14, under 16, and under 18 championships. She's 24-12, and I think she may have all her IM norms. Maybe she's going for GM norm now. She is a formidable young talent, and I gleaned from reading kibitzes on the internet that she is the most famous chess player in Greece, the only one that ever appears on television, and I can understand why. She seems to have a very bright future. Let's see her take on Uzbek IM Jurabek Khamrakulov in round 2 in one of the tongue-twistiest games I've ever had to do on my show. So that one's coming up next. All right, so we have Khamrakulov against Tsolakidou. That's fun to say. I'm just going to say, I know, DJ Kham. Now, this is a very interesting opening in this game. Okay, little story. I mean, it's been told before, but this move was originated in the 1997 Groningen World Championship Tournament, which is what is now would be called the World Cup. And it was played by two different players at the same time in the same room. One of them was Krasenkov. I think he played against Gildardo Garcia. And the other was Zvagintsev, who played against me. And I was like, what is that? G4. Nowadays, this kind of spike is not so unusual. Of course, black takes the pawn, rook g1 to get back g7. Now, I think I played h6. I ended up getting a pretty good game, although missed winning chance to end up a draw. And I think somebody played this against me one other time. I also played h6, and I won that game pretty easily. But Tsolakidou, you know what? She has a pretty good common sense reaction. She just castles. Bishop g2. I'm not really sure that bishop g2 is the right idea, because it seems like, white is setting up kingside attack, and I think that DJ Kham should have really just, maybe focused more attention on maybe getting a pawn storm going. I thought the way he played in general was kind of very unusual, very restrained approach. Meanwhile, black is staking some space here. Doesn't want to take the knight and give up the dark squares, but she eventually eliminates that problem by setting up a sturdy pawn structure. And f5 looks like a looks like a nice idea to really grab some space and block things up. If white takes en passant, the knight can get back in the game, and black has the f-file. So white castled, but this just does not look right to me to castle with all these pawns advanced. It seems like black has a pretty easy game here. So castles e5. And queen d7. I guess she had her reasons for not playing knight c7. It seems to make some sense to do that and try to play queen e8, maybe to get out of the way of some knight d5 ideas. Maybe even knight d5 is possible here. So queen d7 is a natural enough move. King h2, I guess, maybe to defend against f4 and bishop h3. So now she sets up a queenside demonstration, b5, playing for b5, which is a reasonable idea, but it never actually happens. After bishop c1, she shifts gears, queen f7, and this is actually a pretty strong move as the queen is ready to come over to h5, and white is just not in good position to defend that side of the board. Still, it would have been a good idea to dump this knight at d5, because this knight is really doing more than the dark squared bishop for black, and I think he needs to use that knight effectively. But after rook g1, doesn't seem to really help against queen h5 very much. Now black took the knight, very good idea. And actually queen takes is even kind of losing, because after e4 chasing away the knight, the queen comes to h5 and just picks off the h4 pawn. And rook g1 certainly made that worse. So pawn takes, not very desirable, and queen h5. So black never follows through with the b5, which would have been a reasonable idea, but she goes straight for the king side. And now this knight comes over, and it's suddenly white is just running for his life. And f4, even stronger than taking on h4. And now we're getting into the kind of the forced win territory. Bishop g4, and the computer says knight takes f4 is even stronger than knight takes h4, which I can believe, because this allows white to sacrifice in exchange and shift the momentum a little bit. But black is really just a couple moves from consolidating, getting this knight on e8 out. And she manages to do all that in time. Fe5, she ignores that. She can take off the bishop. Of course, she's going to take the bishop and mate down here. So the bishop runs. And here comes the knight. And DJ Ham is trying to set up rook h1. But black gets rid of that dark square bishop. And guess what? Consolidates the king side just in time. All right, so white takes the pawn. But black runs down the pawn on d6. Okay, getting out of the way of rook takes e4 and trying to take a pawn. But, okay, first of all, black gets rid of the only danger in the position, and now the b file is opened as well. So it's just a matter of time before the heavy pieces run down a winning attack, but it comes a lot faster with the open b file. King f2, and now at this point, tactics are starting to show up in the position. Queen b8 threatens rook b2 and also guards the back rank. I think that one's kind of smart. King e3, and okay, now black could have played queen e5, king f2, rook e4 on this rook here, and I think d takes e4 makes it the hardest to get at white, but then we could see something like check, king d2, rook b2, king d3, rook e1. That's the killer. That wins the queen. So forced win there, but I mean, I don't know if there's any time pressure, but just from a practical standpoint, rook f8 is a very nice move too, because it threatens queen f4 mate. It threatens a killing check on the e-file. It guards the back rank. It's just a matter of time. Sometimes you don't need to really calculate the big forcing continuations because the simple moves are good enough to win. This is an example, d4. And black has many ways to do it, But this is quite crushing, because if pawn takes, rook b3, and there's no answer because king f2 drops the rook, king d2 allows rook b2, winning the queen, and well, that's really no choice because bishop can't interpose and queen takes loses everything. So c takes d4 was answered by king takes, really quite sad. Queen d6, and now rook takes e4. Now, relatively easy to calculate combination, but there's a very nice tactical echo at the end here. If king takes e4, black has rook e1, queen takes, and now we get a skewer here, and black emerges with a queen for a rook. So the game finished. Pawn takes, queen check, king d4, rook d1, the same tactical idea, one file over. Now king c5, queen d6 is mate, and if queen takes rook, queen d6, and again picking up the queen. So cute little, as I say, tactical echo there at the end, as Stavrula Solakidou wins nicely, and she's actually been doing quite well in this tournament. She was in the lead after 6 rounds, and she took it on the chin in the 7th round. Those are the games through Sunday. It's a very tightly packed field, so at this point, really almost anybody could win the event, and a lot of players playing for Norm. So we'll know next week how it all comes out in St. Louis. All right, I hope everyone enjoyed the show this week. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, and please join me next time on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC.